So now let's talk about process improvement. So first we're going to talk about the theory of constraints. So we have many aspects to the theory of constraints, and these are the metrics that we're going to use to see how it's going to affect our profit. So we need to keep our inventory low, and that's where supply chain comes in. We need to make sure that we have the materials we need when we need them, but we don't need to have excess on the shelf. We'd be overstocking. But then we also need to keep down operating expenses. And this is a company-wide type project or endeavor where everybody tries to do the best they can to use up what they have before trying to get more. And then we have throughput. So this is, like the manufacturing throughput. Your company can produce X number of widgets per hour. Well, that's the throughput. If you cut it in half, your profits are going to go down. So if you can keep these three categories and make sure they don't go the opposite direction than what they're shown, your profits will increase. They'll stay the same or increase. But as soon as you have something like excess inventory, your profit starts to shrink. Or if you have too many operating expenses and that starts to grow, well, your profit will shrink because you're paying for those operating expenses. And like I said earlier, if your throughput decreases, well, you're going to have less items to sell, which will mean your profit decreases. So when we need to look at what's a bottleneck and what's not a bottleneck. So when we look at this image here, we have essentially two bottles, but when you look at the neck of the bottle, that's why it's called a bottleneck. If you were to tip both of these bottles over, which one do you think would empty out faster? If you guess the bottle on the right, you'd be correct because it has a wider neck. So you can compare that like a milk jug compared to a beer bottle. And if you're looking at it, the body is not a bottleneck because there's no constraint there. But once you get to the bottleneck, how it narrows down causes that constraint. So what are the 5 focusing steps of the theory of constraints? Well, we need to identify, exploit, subordinate, elevate, and repeat. So we need to identify our bottlenecks. Usually these are easily spotted. They're always busy. The worker there might be always busy doing something, doesn't have any downtime. And there's work backing up, meaning there's work in progress that's just waiting to be worked on. Well, we need to exploit. We need to remove any non-value added work or interruptions to the bottleneck. So if the person is doing something that can possibly be done somewhere else, we need to get rid of that. Or that he shouldn't be doing, or that worker should not be doing. We need to get rid of that. So we need to subordinate other activities. For example, if the worker is doing A, B, and C, but they're throwing in D, well, maybe D needs to be moved on to somewhere else. So we need to move these activities away from the bottleneck. Now, we could also do what's called elevate. Do we need 2 people at that workstation? That way we could possibly double the throughput. Or do we need a second machine? Or do we slow down other machines that are ahead so the work doesn't build up in front of that station? All these things are possibilities. And then once we eliminate the bottleneck, we need to go back and repeat the process. So we need to identify the new bottleneck. There always will be a bottleneck, and you just keep going through this process over and over and over again because there is some constraint on the system. Now, sooner or later, you're going to hit a point where you can't make the process better without spending more money or adding another, let's say, an assembly line or a manufacturing line. But there may be some other things you can do. Maybe you need a 3rd shift instead of having a 1st and 2nd shift. It could be that. Or maybe you need to decrease. You have less work now, so now maybe you need to change what 3rd shift works on. All these things are things you can look at when you're considering the theory of constraints. But how does this affect total cost savings? Well, we didn't talk about it, but we have Lean and Six Sigma. We will talk about those in the next two topics. But when we combine all three, Lean, Six Sigma, and theory of constraints, that's known as the trio, the process improvement trio, which can lead to an 89% total cost savings average. Or I shouldn't say average. It will, when they're used together, you'll have the biggest impact on your company. Some companies use only Six Sigma, some companies use only Lean, but 89% of companies use all three. As you can see here, the trio is Lean, which is waste reduction. Six Sigma is reducing variation, and theory of constraints is to alleviate constraints. So this is process improvement. If you go through these steps, and another tool we're going to use is process mapping, which is our next video, you can definitely have an impact on the process, and you might be able to make it better. So let's go ahead and move on to the next video.